Welcome to another episode of the Kemetic How-To Guide for Egyptian Pagan and Kemetic Practitioners. I'm your host, Sharon. Before I get on to today's topic, in case you've been wondering, where on earth I've been, I figured I'd show you one of the things that I've been working on in the meantime. This is going to be a Christmas present for some folks I know. This is a entirely handmade plush transformer. I hope I haven't given myself arthritis working on this guy, because, every single stitch of this was done by hand, and I'm just about done with him, and I'm so glad, because now I can get back to taping. So, on to today's episode. With the winter solstice approaching, everyone, pagan and non-pagan, is talking about the Mayan apocalypse, and the end of the world, and things like that, and naturally, one might ask, well, what did the ancient Egyptians think about, the end of the world? So, I'm going to give you a little bit of background information on that. First of all, with the Mayan calendar, for one, there's more than one calendar. The one that everybody's talking about, I believe it was found in a site in the Yucatan, and it was a big stone calendar. They have a short count and a long count. The Mayans were exceptional mathematicians, and they had this calendar, or they had several calendars carved in stone, and one of them ended on December 21st, 2012, when you adjust it to today's dates, when you figure out their equivalents. Thing is, there was another calendar found in another site, I believe it was closer to Mexico City, and that one ends a few years from now. But that one hasn't been published to the degree that the one everyone's talking about has. Somebody took a lot of New Age ideas, and this whole thing with the calendar ending, there's probably some thoughts about the age of Aquarius worked into all of this, and now everybody's thinking the world is going to end. Obviously, from the way I'm talking, you can conclude that I don't think so. What I do think is unfortunate is that at this point in time, nobody knows everything that the ancient Mayans knew in order to write and carve up another calendar. They had no idea when they carved this one that there wouldn't be priests and astrologers and learned men in their society who could carve another one, when the current one runs out. But, maybe, again, going back to the idea of the age of Aquarius, maybe we can have something else to offer in its place. And there are still Mayans living today in Mexico and Guatemala and Central America. They just, they use the same calendar that we do now. But, the ancient Egyptians had different ideas about, the duration of civilization and the end of time and things like that. I would suggest, if you want to read more about that, look up on Google, because that's where I found it. This is a Masters Thesis entitled "The Destiny of the World, a Study on the End of the Universe in the Light of Ancient Egyptian Texts." And it's by Shireen M. El-Sabai. I'm probably messing up their last name, but let's hear it for print. This Master's Thesis analyzes Egyptian literature going from the pessimistic writings to magical texts, the coffin texts, the Book of the Dead, and so on, and looks at how did they describe, chaos, the end of the world, and what meaning did it have. And the pessimistic literature is what is talked about a lot of times. This was writings that referred to the period between the end of the Old Kingdom and the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, when there were a lot of weak kings and there was no political stability anymore. And at one time we thought that this was a period of chaos, and there may have been some civil war, but a lot of what they talked about became a trope. And if you're a fan of TV tropes, .com, then you know what a trope is. It's just a theme that gets used over and over again, and you find it a lot in their literature. Sometimes it's used for political purposes. If you had a strong king who came up and he wanted to make it look like he was, his gift to Egypt, there were writings that were written, and it's strongly suspected that they were commissioned to say, okay, everyone was in a state of chaos. The river wasn't flooding the way it should. Poor people became rich, and rich people were out in the street. But then this king came along, and he established order again. It's not unique to the Egyptians, but of course, as time went on, you started to have, those ideas of prophecy and a savior coming, kind of got mixed in with the Hellenistic ideas. But if you want to really get an idea of what the Egyptians thought about the end of the world, because they didn't describe it in nearly the detail you have in something like, say, Revelations. There's enough things in Revelations. I wonder if the original author of Revelations was on some kind of a really bad acid trip, or if they were just writing in metaphors that were so unique to that point in time, that we don't understand any of them now, much as the fundamentalist Christians might try. But there's a spell from the Book of the Dead that really gives you an idea of what the Egyptians thought about the end of the world. It's spell 175. And I'm going to read to you here from Raymond Faulkner's translation. It starts off, and you have a tomb, the creator speaking to Thoth, to Jehuti. O Thoth, what is it that has come about through the children of Nut? They have made war, they have raised up tumult, they have done wrong, they have created rebellion, they have done slaughter, they have created imprisonment, they have reduced what was great to what is little in all that we have made. Show greatness, O Thoth, so says a tomb. And this you might recognize as being some of that trope of, there's tumult and things aren't what they should be, so that's how they envision the, end times, I guess, or a state of chaos. But then it switches to the dead person speaking to a tomb. And he asks, how is it that I have traveled to a desert which has no water and no air, which is deep, dark, and unsearchable? A tomb says, live in it and be content. The dead person says, but there's no lovemaking there. A tomb says, I have given spirit being instead of water, air, and lovemaking, contentment in place of bread and beer. So says a tomb. Do not be sorry for yourself, for I will not suffer you to lack. What's interesting is this is an opposite of the very physical idea of an afterlife that you typically find in Egyptian texts. They believe that they would be eating and drinking and having sex and doing all the things they did while they were alive. This kind of gives an opposite view that it will be spirit, but, people will not suffer lack. But the dead goes on to ask, it says, what will be the duration of my life? A tomb says, you shall be for millions on millions of years, a lifetime of millions of years. But then the next sentence is, he says, I will dispatch the elders and destroy all that I have made. The earth shall return to the abyss, to the surging flood, as in its original state. But I will remain with Osiris. I will transform myself into something else, namely a serpent, without men knowing or the gods seeing. This is probably the most important idea in this text, and it's explained in the dissertation, the Masters Thesis. At the end of the world, yes, everything will return back to the state that it was. All that will be left will be Ra, or a tomb. And what's interesting, he uses the word transform. In Egyptian, that's Khepri, which you might recognize as another aspect of the Creator. And then you'll have Osiris. So you'll have birth, death, rebirth. The life and death will both be together at the end of time. And what that means is you have all the makings for it to begin again. So the Egyptian belief is that, yes, the world may end, or it will end a very, very long time from now, millions of years. But when it does, it will contain within it the seeds for a new beginning. Because, you'll have Ra and Osiris. And from that point, who knows, we could be right now in the umpteenth creation you know, especially if you're familiar with ideas from astronomy, the Big Bang being the beginning of creation, and then the what they called at one point the Big Crunch, when the idea that the universe would fall back in on itself and then it would critical mass and you'd have another Big Bang. So that's actually fairly similar to what this spell is talking about. So when you're celebrating or you're talking to people, even if they're not pagan, who are like, oh well, so what do you think about Friday, about the Mayan apocalypse? Hopefully this will give you something you can tell them. Well, it's just the end of a calendar. There'll be another one. There'll be another way to mark time that we can come up with. And in the meantime, just have a good one. And I'm going to give you a bit of a prediction. The next big thing that people are going to talk about, because we've had Y2K, got the Maya calendar, the next big thing is going to be an asteroid that is set to come very, very close to the Earth. And this is of interest to those of us who are Egyptian pagan or just Egyptophiles. That asteroid is named Apophis. Interesting aspect of that, though. A cousin of mine actually is an astronomer. He's worked on the Hubble with the Hubble telescope and with the Keck Observatory in Hawaii, and he knows the guy who discovered the near-Earth asteroid and named it Apophis. It's set to brush between the Earth and the Moon on April 13th, 2029, and it was named Apophis not specifically because of the Egyptian mythology and Apophis, the serpent that tries to destroy the sun every night, but actually because the guy is a fan of Stargate, and there's a Stargate character named Apophis. And when my cousin told me that, because I'm not a big fan of Stargate, but it's still linked to the mythology, so that's something that you can tell people, and who knows, in another 15 years or so, that could be the big thing that everybody's talking about, like my calendar now. Because people have got to have something to jaw about at the water cooler. So hopefully I've given you something that you can add to the discussion and give you some perspective for your own pagan or Kemetic practice. So for the Kemetic How-To Guide, this is Sharon, wishing you Synipti and Happy Solstice.